I'm your host, Nate Medeiros, and it'll be my pleasure today to go through network access control systems with you all. If this is your first webinar, please know that this is an interactive session. You can use the chat feature at any time to ask some questions as we go through and discuss cybersecurity from a networking perspective of our protected networks. Now, we've talked a lot about remote access, BYOD networks, segmented networks in our previous webinars. Once again, you can go to OPSWATacademy.com and look at the lists of pre-recording webinars for any of those and this one as well. This webinar is recorded and it will be available at 7 days after publishing today on the OPSWAT Academy website for webinar recordings. So for any reason you lose connection or miss a section, you can always come back and look at the OPSWAT Academy website for the recording of this webinar. We also don't give certifications. Another common question, we don't give certifications for watching the webinars. However, you can go to the OPSWAT Academy website and we do have a free certification course as well. So if this is your first time hearing about OPSWAT Academy, you can go ahead and head over there and get your Introduction to Critical Infrastructure Protection certification from us and explore the other options we have there on the training platform. All right, so network access control systems. What is an app? What is a network access control? Well, from a cybersecurity product perspective, it's one of the most easily inferred from the name compared to a lot of other solutions. It's a product that you place within your network in several different ways, mind you, in which you can protect that network from unwanted endpoints connecting to it. There are many different network topographies, many different methods of segmentation, and that can impose a non-standard method on how we introduce solutions to protect those networks and assets. One of the main things to consider with a network access control solution is how can I ensure that the most critical assets of my network have an impassable stage, if you will, in which devices can get to those assets. So what is it ultimately that we're trying to solve? Why do we want a NAC solution to protect our network? Well, you can imagine if anybody can go inside my building or somehow access a patch panel or whatever it is and plug in their Raspberry Pi or laptop into any available network port, and that device being given full reign access onto the network, that there's a lot of nasty things that person can do within that network. And that's just one example, or you can imagine a lot of different scenarios. Maybe they flood the network with unwanted traffic. Maybe they are reading clear text protocols that are only supposed to be within that subnet and not supposed to go outside of that virtual network. Maybe they are receiving information about sensitive assets within that network where otherwise that wouldn't be sent out. So just the nature alone of preventing an unwanted endpoint to be connected into just any random switch, hub, or port, we want to be able to prevent that from happening. So that's one use case of a network access control solution. Another one is device compliance. Device compliance being, yes, not only do we not want random devices connecting to our network, but even ones that we own, that my employees are using and connecting to the network, I want to make sure that those are free of malware. I want to make sure that their antivirus systems are up and active, that their firewall is on, that they aren't running unwanted applications because they wanted to convert a PDF to a JPEG with some strange unsupported application. So we can also use NACs to provide compliance to the network as well. Because even if the company owns the device, the user could have unknowingly installed some rootkit from a drive-by download attack, or they could have screen capture software from unknowingly installed that's sending out externally to some hacker server somewhere, where now all they're getting is screen captures of sensitive information from inside the network, and all that's on a technically wanted device, if you will, on the network. So just saying this device yes, this device no isn't really enough. We also need to know this device is the device I want. It's run by the person I want running that device, and I can validate that this device itself is meeting minimum security standards of my organization. So with those multitude of requirements, any of you that might have done any simple networking before, even if you haven't done networking for any enterprise environments, just setting a network up in your own home, you've experienced this in some way, where if you plug in your Ethernet cable to that port on your router, this is basic example as you could possibly get in like a home network. Nothing's going to block you from doing that. Nothing's going to stop you or verify that everything's okay. And even while enterprise networks are much more complex, and you can have a series of virtual networks, multiple subnets, ultimately, that's just a logical separation and organization of where the user is accessing from. Are they accessing from this core switch or this wireless access point, or do I want to organize them based on what Active Directory OU groups they have? All of those things aren't necessarily blocking anything. It's just an organizational structure, which is very necessary, but from a cybersecurity perspective, not solving the challenges we're looking to solve. So we need to introduce something new. We need to introduce a new solution into the environment that can actually handle all these requirements that we have. There are many NAC solutions out there. Cisco's had one for a very long time. At OPSWAT, we have our solution where we put a lot of emphasis on the ability for this device compliance to really take place. Even Cisco itself using our SDK for the compliance checking that they have. So regardless of what solution you're using for a network access control solution, you're still trying to solve those three problems. And from the deployment standpoint, I'm going to be talking from the perspective of the OPSWAT solution now, because this is ultimately the one that we can relate to the most from the solutions that we have. But keep in mind that even though I'm going to be referring to the OPSWAT NAC as the NAC from this perspective, it's really holds true to almost any NAC solution as well. Right? That they're all looking to accomplish those goals. So keep that in mind. That most of what I'm going to be saying is product agnostic, even if I end up talking about specifically the OPSWAT NAC solution. Some of these features may be OPSWAT NAC only. Some of them might be both, but just you can find out your own for other product specifics in the future. So with the OPSWAT NAC, that can be deployed into a network in two different ways, and this is a pretty important decision to make for a network administrator that's adapting a NAC product. And that ultimately is what layer in the OSI model are you going to be deploying the NAC into? And I'll go ahead and share my screen briefly here so we can pull up the OSI model together and just take a look. Just need a moment. Share screen. This one. Share. Okay, great. I think we are sharing. Let me double check. It looks like we are. Okay, so here on the screen, we are showing the 7 layers of the OSI model. Oops. All right. And when it comes to the NAC solution, there are only essentially 2 layers we're primarily focused on, and those are layer 2 and layer 3. For those of you not familiar with the OSI model, this is the backbone of the TCP/IP communication, in which pretty much all intercommunications between computers over Ethernet will communicate with each other. We start from the very base physical layer, that is the actual hardware and chips on the machine, creating the essentially electrical pulses over the physical medium. So think of your network interface cards, your NICs. And then you ultimately get to more logical steps. For example, in layer 2, the data link layer, that's building in frames. And those frames are then built on top of with the network layer, where you start seeing things like IP addresses, and then so on and so forth until you get to layer 7, where you have the human-computer interactions with those services. We're going to be focusing specifically on layer 2 and 3. We don't need to worry about layer 1 because that's not going anywhere. That's a physical. It's a physical thing. It's the MAC address, or the MAC. The MAC address of the computer is written onto that physical raw bit stream. So the data link layer in layer 2, and the network layer in layer 3. The simplest deployments of the NAC solution are usually done with the layer 3, essentially because everything on the network is already talking IP addresses to other devices within the network. But you do have to realize that you are now using the NAC essentially as a primary redirect to, if you want to do any blocking action or any prevention action, new IPs can be discovered, new IPs can be blocked. New users, that if you have a registration system, so the OPSWAT NAC does have a registration system as well. If you're doing like a guest login portal and those kind of features are enabled, that's a redirect as well. So those can all happen on the network layer, in which everything is essentially doing an orchestration of IP redirects in order to accomplish these tasks. When we are talking about the layer 2, the data link layer, I'm going to see if I can share it on a different screen now. Let me check for questions really quick. And once again, everybody, feel free to ask questions in the chat. This is a interactive session as well. So even though I love talking, feel free to ask questions, and I will take a moment every now and then to see. So once again, feel free. All right, I'm going to switch over to a new window. There we go. All right, let's make sure that we are seeing this. Okay, looks like we are. So this is a diagram of the network access control system, the Metafiner network access control system, in a layer 2 integration. Now, what does that mean? It means that normally in a layer 3, you essentially just have your core router, your other elements, your data center. And if a device wanted to go outbound to the internet, or if we wanted to connect to another resource, it would be just dealing with IP routing through the core router. However, with the layer 2 integration, the network access control solution, has a direct integration with a layer 2 switch. A layer 2 switch actually handling the ability to manipulate, control, and manage those layer 2 communications between endpoints on the network. What does that ultimately allow you to do? It allows you to unlock essentially new ways that you can manage and secure those devices within the network. One of the primary things that we see with the layer 2 integration is the use of ACLs that you can now implement. The ACL standing for Access Control List. Ultimately, what that allows you to do, from the most basic topography concept, is give east to west protection on any location on the network, where normally I can protect my device from jumping from one subnet or one VLAN to another VLAN. I can secure that normally even with the layer 3 deployment, but I can't say, make sure that this device cannot talk this protocol to another device within its own subnet. That's an east to west protection. If all of my devices, you can imagine in a grouping, you line them up all side by side, it's devices that are directly within its own bucket of that network segmentation. That's an east to west communication, side to side, if you will. Where if I had to jump to a new subnet, or basically just go at any point where I need to go through a gateway in order to find a new location of the network, that is where you're doing any north to south jumping. Anything without going through a gateway is essentially another good way to think of east to west. So you can imagine that the ability to connect to this requires a few things. You actually need to have a layer 2 capable switch, or a switch that actually has COA and disconnect, for example, that actually allows you to use these immediate termination network connections that then can be placed into a quarantine, for example. Now, what we can do when these network requirements are fulfilled is unlock a more immediate network quarantining action, like I mentioned before. So if a device falls outside of that compliance requirement, any connections can be terminated, and that device can be put into a quarantine VLAN, for example. That would then allow the network access control solution to manage those devices and endpoints in real time. And all those things can be done in real time as well from layer 3 connections, but there needs to be some kind of termination in order to accomplish those things. So we're given just a more control and more ability to lock down the very specific communications between devices on that layer 2 communication with the layer 2 switch integration. However, the network requirements and the existing network gear that you need to have in order to accomplish that is higher. It's a higher, essentially, environment requirement in order to accomplish this. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Looks like we got a couple questions. Are we going to get this document at the end of the event? Yes, so not directly from these diagrams. However, you can absolutely access two things: the recording for this. So if you want to view the diagrams and the recordings after this, you can go to OPSWAT.com for looking at the NAC solution. That's where I actually pulled the diagram from. And most importantly, you can absolutely go to the OPSWATacademy.com and look at the OPSWAT Professional Metadefender NAC course, which we have. So there's absolutely multiple options for you to learn more about the NAC solution The professional deep dive actually goes into the NAC solution interface, where you're learning how to do these things from a network perspective. I also recommend the Network Security Associate course. That course is much cheaper. It's also a conceptual based course where you learn a lot of what we're talking about on this call, if you will, but a little bit more of a deeper dive and interactive videos as well. So there are plenty of resources for you to do on OPSWATacademy.com. Just take a trip over there, look over for what we have for you as well. Similar question, the fonts are small. Can we get the materials after the session? There are all kinds of materials for you at OPSWATacademy.com. Just look for anything that says network on it, and you'll find material on this. All right, and yes, we do send a recording to your email. If you've joined, you'll receive a recording to the email after this. And do participants of the webinar get a certificate from the participation? No, so we don't give certificates from the participation. However, I do, at the end of the session, we'll be giving a special surprise for those participants that have joined. And it's almost as good. But you can go to the OPSWAT Academy website, and we do offer a free certification there as well. So you can go to OPSWATacademy.com and learn the Introduction to Critical Infrastructure Protection course, in which case you can receive the certification. So, all right, everybody, thanks for the questions. So keep it up at any time. I will be constantly checking the chat periodically. And so feel free to ask away. All right, so we're all caught up there. So going back to the network access control solution, I wanted to show you guys those diagrams so we could have the perspective of where those deployments exist within the network. But you have to also keep in mind that ultimately we're solving the same problem, just from a layer 2 versus layer 3. Yes, you do get a little more real-time flashy functionality from the layer 2 integration. Really, what that comes down to, if a decision has to be made, it's how immediate do I need my response to be for a device that is non-compliant with my organization? If the answer is these are really critical assets and that device needs to get out right away, then building the layer 2 infrastructure, if it doesn't already exist, a compatible layer 2 switch, adding that into the network would be a good thing to do. If the answer is no, where yes, obviously nobody wants to have a non-compliant device on their network, but it's not going to be mission critical and take everything down all at once. If that requires to have a newly established connection for anything to happen, and a delay potentially or whatever it is, then we don't need to worry about that as much. It's not worth trying to implement a whole new network topography in order to make a compatible layer 2 integration in order to have the NAC solution just work for that environment. So we can take the security requirements of the network that we're trying to protect and ultimately make the decision for what's best to use. And that's why we actually see a lot of layer 3 deployments with the NAC solution, because it does exactly what they need to do, even though it doesn't have the flashy immediate quarantine action. It's just a matter of what the requirement is for the customer and for the network. So that said, it's important to also bring the perspective in for other things that a NAC can do, because we've talked about the big hyperbolic ones. We talked about somebody plugging in, some Raspberry Pi into the network and stealing data, or somebody that's plugging in their their device, and they have malware installed on it, and they're ignoring all the pop-ups from Windows security, and they're plugging in their device. All those things that the NAC wants to make sure that device doesn't get on to do. So there's a couple elements about this that I want to discuss. One, how is the network access control solution going to know what the status of a device is? So if my goal is to say, I want to know what the firewall status of that device is, has it had any recent threats, does it have any software, how is a network control solution going to get any of that information from a device? Does anybody want to take a guess as to how that could be accomplished? I'll give you guys a few seconds. How would a network appliance know anything about a device, such as is the firewall on, is the antivirus up to date? All right, we're getting radio silence here, so I'll just go ahead and move forward. The answer, at least the best of our ability as of today, is through a client. It's through it's through client software, and I'm seeing some things, port scanning via CMS. These are actually really good responses. Ultimately, that would be a beautiful thing if we could just check network status of the device, if we could see what it's listening to, common applications running on common, those specific ports, and just have a big database of everything that's running on that device. Unfortunately, the things that we need to know about from a cybersecurity perspective isn't just, does it have this application? Is it listening for it? You could find out if a device's firewall is off, if it's listening on every single port you try. Even though that's probably not a very good security configuration on that device. So yes, there is that. But something a little more nuanced. So for example, the Windows security, it's just a Windows device. Not only do I want to know that the Windows security device is on, but I also want to know that the antivirus definitions are up to date. And that's a requirement for me from a security perspective. Let's put our security manager hats on. It's a requirement for me that every device within my organization that is accessing my network has their antivirus definitions up to date within no longer than 7 days old. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the antivirus definitions, just as a really quick recap, when it was released out into the wild, there's a period of time in which the antivirus company, in this case Microsoft, because we're talking about Windows Defender, if we're talking about a different antivirus company like McAfee or Avira or Avast or whatever it is, they all have to go through their process where they get the malware sample, they categorize it, and then they send updates to their endpoints to now be able to recognize that malware when they see it. That's the static analysis process of these antivirus engines that most of our devices use, in which that's why it's able to quickly recognize those malicious files and then immediately act on them. But you can imagine that, one, there's that period of time in which the antivirus company or the Microsoft antivirus team has to go through that discovery process and send out and actually send that out to the users. So there's a period of time in which you're vulnerable to that malware, but it's less likely because it's new and they're supposed to be reacting to those things quickly. If it's so new that it doesn't even get updated, that's what we call a 0-day attack, but that's another webinar. You can check out the 0-day webinar. Anyway, I don't want to spend too much longer with the subtext, but um, if you don't update, if you don't actually receive that update, then you are more vulnerable for longer. You're actually um, exponentially increasing your chances that that malware can infiltrate your system, because you are not only getting that initial wait time, but you are introducing unnecessary time delay to update your antivirus definitions. So as a security manager for an organization, I just want to make sure that if I have to stop somebody from entering a network for 30 seconds while they update their antivirus definitions, I'm going to do it, because maybe they went on vacation, they haven't opened their laptop in 2 weeks, and they're very out of date. The last thing I want them doing is just immediately plugging in to the network. I want to make sure that that device is in a state in which it can get its security updates back, and then go in and access everything that it needs to. Which, in case, what that would look like from the user perspective with a properly deployed NAC is that they would plug it in, they'd open their device, they'd see that they're not connected to other devices on the network, but they would be seen by an interface saying that their device has been quarantined due to non-compliance. It'll tell them why, and it'll say, some kind of custom message, in which case we can say, try again in 5 minutes or 2 minutes, or whatever it takes to update your antivirus definitions. So you can see that there's a lot that we can do to play with and secure that kind of situation. So that client is necessary, and it was a long walk to get back there. But the ports, scanning just ports that some of you suggested, which, once again, great choice, great guess. It's most commonly used, and the reason why port scanning is just such a fantastic thing is because you don't actually need to install anything on an endpoint. People don't like installing clients, and if you can avoid it, that's the ideal situation. Sometimes you can do a transient client, one that actually doesn't install on the device. It just runs, extracts, gets the necessary information to a network control solution, and then removes itself. That's another option. But in order to get the most information that we really care about from a cybersecurity perspective, as it stands today, clients are the way to go. There's device fingerprinting, where we can get all kinds of really great information about the device as well, but we're not getting these nuanced things like my way too long of an example of the antivirus definitions, right? You need something like a client that can actually get there, those more specific requirements. So that's ultimately how you can get the highest level of a protection from a cybersecurity standpoint from for a secure environment, is using a client-based compliance check coupled with the network access control solution. So that's the OPSWAT way of doing the ultimate network protection process. That said, the deployments for a NAC solution do not need a client in order to function. You're just missing out on a big piece of that security puzzle, where you have those network security compliance requirements that are getting fulfilled on the spot just by connecting to the network access control solution itself. So that said, there are other approaches that we can use a NAC for. And even from an organizational standpoint, and from a categorization of devices, one of the biggest challenges that initially started when IoT devices were starting to become all the rage was that there was no way to add accountability to any of the devices that were getting plugged into the network. If somebody plugged in a smart thermometer or you know, a water plant or a plant that automatically watered its plants and had you know, temperature communications over the network or whatever it is, you know, all the IoT smart devices. There's a lot of these that exist even in enterprise networks as well. And then even in critical infrastructure networks, so things like you know, power plants and manufacturing, there's this whole other concept called IIoT, Industrial Internet of Things, and those might be sensors and you know, temperature gauges, pressure gauges, things like that, that are communicating on very similar IoT setups and infrastructure to devices. You can also very easily visualize a situation where if I have a sensor and a pressure gauge on a network, I want to know that those are mine, that those are my sensors and pressure gauges, that they're not somebody just plugging something in. So accountability is very important when it comes to things like IoT devices on the network. With a network access control solution, specifically with the OPSWAT NAC as well from the future, we can actually do things such as device to MAC address association. So the user experience would be as follows. I plug in my smart thermometer into the network, or you know, get it connected to an access point, and it's not going to be able to talk to anything else in the network because immediately it'll be quarantined by the NAC. It's a new device. I don't know the device. A way that we could do this was several ways to solve this problem from that point. The network administrator could whitelist it. They could be, you know, they can get email from whoever it is, and you know, they can add to the system. But they can also have the user register themselves with their user account. Let's say we're connected to a radio server, we're connected to an Active Directory for all of our users. I can have a user register themselves with their, you know, username, password associated with that user database to say, hey, this device is mine. And then that way, you know, you can introduce this pretty automated process in which people are, the only thing that they would have to do is know the registration point and know the MAC address of what they're trying to connect to. So I could go into a network, set something up inside of my office. I can set up a smart thermometer, then go to the registration site and say, hey, this MAC address of the smart thermometer, this is mine. I'm going to put it under my name. That way, if it ever was uncovered that that smart thermometer was actually, you know, a network scraping tool where I was stealing data, the company would know that it was me that did it, right? Because now I put myself in a situation where I am accountable for the devices that I'm putting on the network. So that's a whole nother aspect that you can use as well. I'm going to take a second here and check the comments. A lot of people calling out where they're from. I'd love to see it from all over the world. Very cool. Let's see, clients-based compliance check. Yes, we mentioned the clients that are needed for the nuanced access. I have a question. What a practical aspect? I'm not really entirely sure there, Obalana. If you want to write a little more about what you mean about the practical aspect, feel free, and we can answer that question. I do have a good question here. Is that the same as the BYOD policy? So that is a great question, Femi. This is a another big challenge with all kinds of network security. We talk about remote connections and BYOD devices and how to push that network perimeter, but even on the local network policy, how do we enforce the ability for us to secure these BYOD devices. So we enter this moral battle, if you will, on what's the right thing to do. Because if we want to enforce a secure environment, we need to have software that can help us do that from the security perspective. And as we've gone through before, having a client-based compliance check is really important for critical networks. If we want to make sure that our critical network is as protected as we can, we want to know these things that we mentioned before. What is the antivirus status? What are the unwanted applications? We might tone down the unwanted applications BYOD because I guess it's up to them for what they have, but we definitely want to know, have they seen any malware recently on their device? So one of the cool things the client can do is it can check your logs of your antivirus, your local antivirus, to say, has there been any detections recently? And you can say, if there's been 3 detections in a week, then I'm going to consider you a non-compliant device. That's an important thing to know, even for a BYOD endpoint. But now we're in a situation where we are requiring somebody to install software that they might not want to install onto their network device, onto their device in order to access the network. So that's where the balance comes in. If that's where the real policy part of that question. The BYOD, for those of you that don't know, stands for bring your own device. So we're talking about devices that these employees own that the company doesn't own. And we're trying to force a security mechanism accessing the network with these BYOD devices. So depending on what it is we're protecting, and we're just, for the sake of this conversation, we're going to say that they're connecting to a relatively critical network, where the let's say the IT infrastructure for this company exists. Their domain controllers, for example. That's definitely critical enough of a component to have this conversation. If we're saying that the IT guys can come in and use their own devices to connect to this network, then we still want to enforce a secure policy. In the policy itself, it needs to be stated, based on the requirements of what it is we're trying to protect, that in order to use your own device within the network, certain standards have to be met. And that varies for what we're trying to protect. So in my example, protecting domain controllers, yes, those users need to be able to, they need to have that client installed to check the security status of the device in order to be able to access the network and provide access to that domain controller situation. If it was something much less critical, let's say your entire company operates on, just cloud applications or through email or whatever it is, that particular individual doesn't need any particular access to anything. The policy can omit those kind of users and those kind of access to not need a client. Maybe they don't need to connect locally. Or maybe the network in which they're connecting to is just, there's no other assets besides other devices. It's a very low risk LAN, if you will. In which case you don't need a client to check those things either. So the most important thing with that question, with any bring your own device situation, is what is that user going to be doing with that device? And how bad can it screw things up? And if the answer is pretty bad, then you want to start being a little more strict with your policies. That's the easiest way to think about it from that perspective. All right, great question. Let's see. What is the difference between NAC and firewall according to network security? That's a very good question. So a firewall is going to be protecting against certain types of connections from one point to another. A firewall can say, I'm going to stop you from connecting to this port on my NIC. So if I'm connected to an IP, if you will, I can go to 8008, 880, whatever it is. A firewall can say I can block you on those specific ports. Firewall can also say I can block IPs from that range, from that specific device or that specific range. A firewall can also say, depending on, and this varies from firewall to firewall, but a firewall can also say I'm going to block these protocols. I'm going to block any HTTPS connections or HTTP connections and only allow HTTPS connections. So those are possible as well. A network access control solution is a little different than a firewall because a network access control solution is helping you put in place policies and requirements in order for devices to access into your local area network. A really good example is you can imagine let's imagine a network as a circle, right? All of my devices are inside of that network. And the firewall, where does that exist? That usually exists around the outside bubble of that circle. I actually might be able to draw this quick enough to be worth it to share. So let's do this. All right, yeah, we're gonna draw this. There we go. Great. Okay. Perfect. So let's go with a circle. We'll make this 5. Okay. There we go. This is our network. We're going to have just 2 devices in here. So can I make 2 laptops? I can just copy it. Okay. So this is you can think of as a traditional network, right? Everything outside of here is the internet and the world. And this is my, this is a cloud represent the internet. This is my access demarcation point is really what it's called when you're going from the outside internet connection into it's like a buildings network. This is an office. We have everything inside of our own local area network. Typically, where the firewall exists here is to say, okay, everything inside of my network, that's mine. That's my 10.0. whatever address, and everything is communicating within these routers, within the local gateways and things like that. Typically, the firewall is going to exist somewhere here, and we'll make it red so we can see. This is where the firewall is going to be. And I am, with this firewall, I'm actually making it pretty easy to block unwanted traffic from, coming in from external connections. A really good representation to say, what's the difference between a firewall and a NAC here is, okay, well, what if instead of trying to attack from the internet here, I, pretended that I got an interview in this building because I wanted to install a malicious device. So I get an interview, but my whole goal is to install a malicious computer when nobody's looking. And I plug this in directly into the network switch here, already inside of the network. And all of these are already connecting to, their own internal network and gateways. So now I'm in a situation where my malicious device that I plugged in, let's say there's like another, just say another gateway right here. Now my malicious device is plugged into everything all the other devices are connected into. And this is all just east to west communication. And I never even touched the firewall. Firewall has no idea about this device back here. A network access control solution is going to be deployed in a situation where every time a new device wants to interface with the network, it has to go through that initial check process in order to be able to access the network access control solution. So I hope that gives a little bit more of a perspective from that. Okay. Of course, now we have a lot of comments. We have 9 minutes left of this meeting, so let's try to get through them. Okay. Are the softwares that are used for client-based compliance check that manage and govern client machines that can help network admins manage enterprise network? Yes. So when I was talking about the client application, I'm specifically, like I mentioned, talking about our OPSWAT solution. We have a client called the MetaDefender client, or the OPSWAT client, and that has the capability of going through all those security requirements that I discussed before. It has unwanted application categorization, checks firewalls, checks for antivirus statuses on devices, and then can report that to a myriad of different solutions. But in our case, it's reporting that information to the network access control solution at the moment the device tries to connect to the network. So the NAC can be better informed to make a decision on whether or not it wants to allow that device actually to connect onto the network. So that's how that process works. All right, can you discuss a little bit more about SnickersNet? I'm pretty sure you meant SneakerNet with that. SnickersNet sounds like a candy network, which is probably very, very good. I'd like to be there. But SneakerNets, it's actually, it was the first kind of network before devices were plugged into each other. But why is it called SneakerNet? Well, it's because in order to transfer data from one computer to another, you had to take it in a physical removable media and walk it over with your sneakers, with your shoes, over to the other device and then plug it in. And so those are actually still used today for really sensitive or critical networks, because the most secure network is the one that's not plugged into anything. That's the ultimate theory with that. And there are definitely situations where the only way you can receive information or insert new information is by having a highly validated set of data on removable media and walking that to that location. Because there is no network in between those two sources of situations, there's not going to be a network access control solution that's going to enable that, right? We do other things such as removable media validation. That's when you're looking at a product called MetaDefender Kiosk, or the media firewall, USB firewall, that can help protect older devices that can't install antivirus software onto them. So there's other solutions that we have, but also that solve that problem. But the NAC doesn't fit in there because, as the name suggests, for an air gap network, there's no network to be had. But good question. All right. This sounds fantastic in theory, but how does this work when you have a large infrastructure made up of differing hardware and software? How could you possibly enforce an act on something like BYOD when the endpoint may have any number of AV solutions, etc.? So Oliver, this is a fantastic question, and that is ultimately what the beauty of the OPSWAT client really does. So if you're ever using something like the Cisco ICE or the Palo Alto connectors, they actually are using our backend SDK, which categorizes hundreds of AV companies, hundreds of settings on devices. There's a Linux client, there's a Mac client, there's a Windows client, obviously. You can get so granular. You can look for very specific, even lesser known AV companies, choose it to make sure it's got a very specific version running on those clients. And yes, there are situations where, some AV company will release an update, and that, might have a situation where that process is broken and needs to be updated on the checking system. But it's all our checking system. So if we don't validate that, then it's going to break for all these other companies that are using our backend compliance software. So it's really high priority for us to make sure that we keep everything up to date, and that we can validate all the different operating systems, that we can validate all the different antivirus software and settings on these devices. So it's a big team that's dedicated specifically to that. At the same time, we actually go through an antivirus vendor validation process where we certify them. We certify, let's say, like Avira or ESET, so that when they release updates, they're doing it in a way that won't break our connections, because Palo Alto connections rely on us, Cisco connections rely on us, all these VPN connections, which are very big nowadays in the world of remote access everywhere. So you brought up a very difficult problem that we spend a lot of resources in making sure we're on top of and solving. But the answer is we actually do have a client that can manage all the various different discrepancies and combinations that you see in a complex enterprise network. So great question. Is the AAA server example of a NAC? So AAA is not an example of a NAC, but it's something that NAC can utilize in order to provide. So AAA is authentication, authorization, and accounting for those of you that haven't heard the acronym before. And essentially this allows you to validate that you are who you say you are, be given the access to the things that you're supposed to be given the access to, and then have those interactions with you on the network be tracked that way. That can be done. You want to tell a NAC, we've talked a lot about device stuff. We talked about the compliance of a device and that, the status of a device. It's also very important that the NAC knows that we are who we say we are, and that we're only given permissions and access to things that I should only be given permission access to. So AAA is a very common mechanism in order to accomplish that goal, in which we're just following standardization of given access, or validating we are who we say we are given access, and then just being tracked essentially. So NAC uses AAA if it's tied into a Radius server or something like that for user validation. So it's more of a NAC uses AAA rather than NAC being an example of AAA. All right. Let's see, can we view this event again? Yes. Every recording will be available on the website. We are out of time, so I'm just looking for one more question to answer. Okay. So I'll answer one more question here. Heuristic analysis versus static analysis, which is preferable for network protection? This is a loaded question. One, because it's typically not framed in the sense of network access protection, but it's also really important when we're talking about how to secure what comes into our network. Now, what we're talking about more with heuristic analysis and static analysis is for malware protection specifically. When we're talking about network access controls, we are primarily talking about the device itself and the person and given access to what they should and should not be given access to. Then, when those devices are on the network, they're communicating, connecting to things like the internet and bringing in data. So now we have to deal with this whole new problem that, okay, we already validated the device is okay, but is the things that they're trying to connect out to the internet, is that safe? That's where we want to do the malware analysis. And we're actually looking at essentially a different product from like the OPSWAT perspective. You're looking at a different product to solve that problem. There's a lot of ways that people can connect to devices and bring in malware on the network. Let's just say it's the internet. A lot of companies use proxy servers to protect their assets. You can use a connection to a proxy server to scan traffic. Metadefender ICAP server is the name of that one. We can use that to scan network traffic, internet traffic as it's coming in. So that's setting the stage. The question is, what's better, heuristic or static? Well, heuristics itself can be static as well. And actually, I actually like to use the word heuristic specifically for talking about a specific form of static analysis. Heuristic can also mean dynamic analysis, such as sandboxing, in which the malware is detonated, and we get a confidence score based on what that malware tries to do. That's also a heuristic scan. That's a term. I like to use the word dynamic for that sense. So if we break that down to the question of what's better for network analysis, static or dynamic, where heuristics are a form of static analysis in which we're just looking at smaller pieces of a file rather than the entire thing and comparing it to a list. We're doing a more advanced way to look at the various code components of the depiled code of that file, but we're still not doing anything with that file. It's actually a heuristic static analysis process as well. The term is pretty broad. But I'm assuming that the real question is basically static, like normal signature definition matching versus sandbox, right? Static analysis, dynamic analysis. Those are the two big situations and hitters for that. From a network perspective, it's usually going to be static analysis. The reason being is that if we have to put the resources into scanning everything in a sandbox as it's being brought in, if you open a web page, you're getting the HTML text, you're getting all the images. If all of those things have to be run through a dynamic analysis process, it's going to take a very long time for the users to receive email. However, if they are downloading a file, then that file should absolutely be going through a dynamic analysis process. So the truest answer is a mix based on what the users are doing. And that's ultimately the best case scenario. A little more complex to set up. But when you use it for what it's best used for, you're introducing the most secure environment you can. Okay, with that, we are out of time, but I did promise a special surprise for you guys. Be active right away. You're going to have to maybe about 20 minutes after this call, but all of you are getting access to a special promo code. The promo code I will actually write in the chat. It's one word. It's NAC OPSWAT, all caps. So you can see that in the chat. That's going to be giving you a 75% off all associate courses that we have. So all of our conceptual-based courses on OPSWATacademy.com. And with this promo code, it'll be available tomorrow. Tomorrow it'll be available for all of you guys. So keep that written down. The code will be active tomorrow, and it's only for you guys. So this recording won't be live until next week, and this promo code will go away next week. So only you guys have access to this for sticking around this entire time. So 75% off all of the OPSWAT Academy websites, OPSWAT Academy associate courses on our website. You can use that promo code. It'll be active tomorrow, and then you can use it to browse around, take a look on what you'd like, and it will the code will go away. It will no longer be active next Thursday. So make sure you use it somewhere between tomorrow and next Thursday. Otherwise, the code will be no longer valid once we go live with this recording, which also answers the question, yes, this recording will be live, but we're doing it 1 week later so that you guys get your special access to the promo code. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. It's been great talking to you. Great interactions. I really appreciate everybody jumping on the chat and asking such great questions. I hope you learn a little bit more about network access control solutions, and be sure to visit the OPSWATacademy.com to learn even more about concepts like this and many other things in cybersecurity. All right, everybody. Thank you all very much, and we'll talk again later.